Hello, writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, the day where I give you my best tips and advice on the art and the business of writing, tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. And today, I want to talk to you about endings. Happy ones. Are they boring? We've covered a few questions recently, like how do you deal with tough topics, and how do you cover sensitive subjects without coming off as preachy? And I appreciate these questions. I'm glad people are asking them and wanting to handle these things sensitively. But I feel like there's a place that these questions are coming from, not all of them, but a lot of them, that I want to talk about. I feel like a lot of writers and other storytellers these days are trying to find new, unique, better ways to tell stories of tragedy and sadness, particularly with sad endings. This is definitely a trend you can see in a lot of storytelling these days, particularly in television, where Game of Thrones has convinced every TV show that it just needs to be the grimmest, dark grimness that ever existed. But also in books. Looking back at the list of the most recent 25 recently published novels that I've read, well over half of them had at least ambiguous or just outright sad endings. And in particular, because of what I write and what I like to read and what I'm trying to do with legacy books, a lot of these stories focused on non-cishet white male characters, even when they were written by cishet white male characters. And as a current example that's going on for me right now, I'm reading Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings right now. I've been reading it for a little bit. I'm not going to do a book review on the channel because I'm not enjoying it. And I'm not enjoying it because it's a bad book. It's well written. The characterization is good. It's just very not happy. And it doesn't really seem to show any prospect of happiness or fun happening anytime soon. And so yeah, I do feel pretty safe in saying that I have seen a cultural shift towards wanting to tell sad stories better. And in the investigations that I've done, and in the reading that I've done, and in watching interviews with big, successful writers, much more successful than me, it seems to come from this attitude that happy endings are just sort of boring. And I'm just like, but are they though? Now this is always going to come down to personal preference. I want to acknowledge that right off the bat. There's certain people out there who, yeah, it is going to be boring to read a happy ending. That's fine, I guess. And I'm definitely not saying that I don't think you can tell a good story unless it has a happy ending. I like lots of stories with sad or ambiguous or very, very bittersweet, more bitter than sweet endings, okay? But I do not like the idea that happy endings are boring, and I think that there's quite a lot of problems with that viewpoint, more so than just people are creating books that I don't personally enjoy. For one thing, as I alluded to earlier, a lot of the not entirely happy or just straight out unhappy endings that I'm reading are happening to characters who have never gotten to experience happy endings. I'm talking queer people, people with color, people with disabilities. Like, these people are always side characters in a white dude's story where they already have unhappy endings, and now they're being written with unhappy endings even when they're the main character. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that when they are being written by more privileged people. Obviously, marginalized people should be free to tell their own stories. That should happen more often than it does in publishing. But yeah, tragedy porn, inspirational, overcoming oppression porn written by white people is just, I have some problems with it. The first fact to start off from is that just writing stories about queer characters, characters of color, or disabled characters that have happy endings is in itself and by itself kind of revolutionary because it doesn't happen very often. And another thing to keep in mind is that all of the biggest, most successful, most universally loved, praised, and reconsumed franchises and stories in the history of humanity that I can think of off the top of my head all have happy endings. And popularity is definitely not any inherent measure of artistic worth, but the fact that these stories can be consumed over and over and over again by a loving populace who still get thrilled and excited and have their own happiness enhanced by the happy ending of the story every single time speaks to the fact that happy endings are not boring. And finally, and this is the part that I myself personally feel to the deepest parts of my soul, stories do make a statement, stories do have an effect. It is not a one-to-one effect. If you put something in a story, it does not mean that you condone it, it does not mean that you think that it is right, it does not mean that you think that it is what is going to happen, but it does have an influence on the audience. And so when, from my perspective, it seems like the zeitgeist has swung very far in the direction of tell sad stories better and sad endings are more valuable than happy endings, I do worry that this plurality of stories with tragic endings is going to start en masse persuading audiences that sad endings are acceptable or even inevitable, especially when so many tragic endings seem to be abandoning any semblance of a point or a message that it shouldn't be that way. This is just one very plain example to illustrate what I'm talking about, but at the end of most of Shakespeare's tragedies, there is a very clear, sometimes even ham-fisted message that this is not okay, it should not have happened, and it could have been prevented. With that message being driven home, especially forcefully, because of the tragic events that you have just witnessed. And while there are too many in real-life tragedies and awful things going on around the world for us to leap indignantly into action every time we see an injustice online, I also don't want us as a species to stop trying to correct things that are awful, tragic, and unjust because our stories have convinced us that that's just the way it is. TLDR, happy endings, not boring, good, write more of them, convince yourself and your friends that the world can be made a better place. That's all I've got for you today, writer. Reminder, I have a Patreon, which you can find in the description, and my $5 patrons get to ask questions for me to cover in future Writer Wednesday videos, and they also get the videos 2 weeks ahead of everyone else. If that sounds good to you, check out the Patreon link in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!